Hey everyone, we're reading Little Britches, Father and I Were Ranchers by Ralph Moody. Chapter 3 and 4 today. Fight Molly is the name of the chapter. Monday morning, Grace and I went to school and the attendance went up a fifth. Bessie Altland came for us and drove us over to the little brick schoolhouse, a mile and a half from home. When Bessie took us in to Miss Wheeler, she said, "I tried to tell Molly just to let them come in overalls and frock, not to get them all dressed up like they were going to Sunday school. But she wouldn't think of it. Doesn't Ralph look cute in his little Buster Brown suit? Molly made it herself." Bessie didn't really talk loud, but her voice was clear and rang in the little room. There were 10 pupils in the school. I was going to say children, but I couldn't because Rudolph Haas was nearly as tall as Father. He was in 8th grade. They all watched us like chicken hawks while Miss Wheeler had us read and do numbers for her. After we were done with the numbers, she decided Grace belonged in the 4th grade and I in the 3rd. Recess didn't go a bit good for me. Before we left home, Mother had taken us into the front room and said, "I am not going to have you children grow up to be rowdies and ruffians just because we live on a farm. Ralph, if you get into a fight in this new school, I shall give you a hard thrashing when you come home. The Bible says that if your enemy smites you on one cheek, you are to turn the other. I want you to follow that teaching absolutely. And Grace, I want you to promise me on your word of honor that you will tell me if he ever raises a hand against any other child at school." She must have heard about Freddie Sprague. He was in 2nd grade, but he was bigger and fatter than I. He hadn't been out to recess a minute when Freddie put a stick on my shoulder and then knocked it off. "Want to fight?" he said. Grace was standing right behind him and hollered, "If you do, I'll tell Mother." I knew she would too, so I said, "No, my mother won't let me. I don't know why the Bible picked out cheeks, but that's right where Freddie hit me. I wanted to hit him back, but I didn't dare to. Mother could spank pretty hard if I did something right after she told me not to. I just let my hands stay down, turned my face around. Freddie hit that side too. He hit it hard. When I started to cry, somebody sang out, 'Molly, Molly.' Then all the boys and even some of the girls started yelling it. Grace came over and wiped my face with her handkerchief. 'Don't cry,' she said. 'Mother will be proud of you.' Then Miss Wheeler rang the bell for us to come in and said Freddie should be ashamed for hitting me. Every time he wasn't looking the rest of the morning, he kept making faces at me." Noon was worse than recess. Grace had brought a rubber ball to school with her. She knew how to play jackstones with it, but the other girls didn't. As soon as we got out at noon, she divided our lunch and went off with the other girls to hunt for the right size stones. Mother had baked us each a cup custard. I laid my 2 sandwiches and a piece of cake on top of my cup and went to look for a place to eat it. When I was halfway out to the carriage shed, Freddie came running out with another stick to put on my shoulder. I spilled my sandwiches and cake trying to get away, and he knocked the cup out of my hands, yelling, "Fight, Molly!" All the other boys laughed at me. Some of them yelled, "Hit the little sissy, Freddie, make him fight." I had to run away to the far corner of the yard. All the other youngsters either rode to school or drove in old buggies. There was an open shed where they backed the buggies in at one end and tied the horses at the other. Willie Aldevote rode a funny-looking grayish-white donkey with big yellow splotches. After they had eaten their lunches, the other boys got the donkey out and started to ride him. They would hold him by the ears until some boy got on. Then they'd let him loose and tickle him with a switch. He would buck like 60. Sometimes the boys stayed on and sometimes they fell off. I had come back to the corner of the shed where I could watch. When Freddie saw me, he hollered, "Let's put Molly on him," and they did. I wasn't very much afraid. I hadn't fallen off the cowboy's horse and thought I could cut the mustard. Anyway, I was willing to take the chance. Mother hadn't said I couldn't ride a donkey. I wanted to show the boys I wasn't a sissy. My ride lasted about half of the donkey's first buck jump. He jumped his heels up, or he kicked his heels up, and I pitched off between his ears. I landed right on my face in the gravel. I skinned my nose and bit my tongue. I couldn't help crying a little, but I didn't make any noise. Mother nearly went frantic when we got home from school. My Buster Brown suit was pretty well messed up from the bloody nose I got when I fell off the donkey, and Freddie had given me a good working over after school. I guess it hadn't helped my looks very much. Grace was so busy telling Mother about my being a good boy and not fighting that until after I was all cleaned up, she forgot to give me the note Miss Wheeler had sent. Mother's eyes got all full of tears when she was washing my face and putting court plaster on my nose. She told me that she was proud of me for being a little gentleman and that she would see to it that those ruffians didn't attack me again. Grace hadn't seen me try to ride the donkey, and I thought it would be best not to mention it to Mother. Father came in from digging post holes just after Grace had remembered about the note. Mother was madder than ever and read it aloud to him. The teacher said that Grace had adjusted herself very nicely with the other girls, and she was sure I would soon make my adjustment. But she would suggest that I wear overalls to school like the other boys. Mother tossed the note down on the table and slapped it with her hand. Her lips were pinched together, and she said, "The fact that I'm going to bring my children up on a farm isn't going to prevent me from bringing them up to be ladies and gentlemen." Ralph wearing overalls to school. The very idea. I shall see that teacher the first thing in the morning. Father shut his eyes and scratched the back of his head. Then he said, "There might be some reason in what she says, ma'am." I think it's Mame. I don't know.
It's Mame.
Mame?
Yeah.
And you know, there have been some gentlemen in overalls. Mother's lips pinched tighter than ever, and she never said a word. Father and Mother sat up in the kitchen till after I went to sleep. I don't know what they talked about, but the part that was about me must have ended in a compromise. Mother didn't go see the teacher, and I didn't wear overalls to school. My time at school wasn't happy. Freddie Sprague made it miserable, and I was scared to death of the yellow spotted donkey. Freddie thought it was a lot of fun to grab me by the back of my pants and jerk hard enough to pull off a couple of buttons. Then I have to hold them up with one hand until I could get to Grace for a safety pin. Mother always made them so I had to unbutton them when the other boys didn't have to. And some of the older ones, were always yelling, "Come, Molly, let Mama unbutton you," or they'd run me down and hug and lug me for another nosedive off the donkey. One raw, windy afternoon when we were at recess, Willie Aldevote made and I betcha that I could hold his breath longer than any of the rest of us. Nobody won because I turned blue and fell over after half a minute. It didn't help me a bit at school, but it really worked fine at home. Though it wasn't nearly so cold in Colorado as it had been in New England. The high altitude bothered my heart a little, and I felt the cold more than the others. Once or twice I got so cold on the way home from school that I turned good and blue. When I did, Mother would doctor me with brandy and sugar. I tried for it often because I liked it, but she would only give it to me if I was really blue to the ears. I found that if I stayed outside long enough to get good and cold, then held my breath for half a minute just before I staggered through the kitchen door, it would get me a spoonful of brandy. Mother never guessed, but after I had worked it half a dozen times, Father caught on and became what our old minister used to call a teetotaler. Father tried to make up to me a little for the trouble I was having at school. He picked Saturdays to go to Denver for loads of lime and second-hand bricks to build a fountain under the house. I always went with him, and each time we had a picnic of custard pie and milk. Then on the way home, he let me drive Bill and Nig. One evening after school, when Father and I were working on the foundation, Fred Altland drove into our yard. He and Father talked for a while about the house and building the foundation. Then Fred said, "Charlie, you can seem to be pretty handy with the tools. You know, my father used to run cattle all through the section when I was a kid. He kept 8 or 10 cowhands all the time, and sometimes there'd be as many as a couple of dozen. The old bunkhouse hasn't been used for 10 years or more. I've been thinking about tearing it down, but all I can get out of it is firewood. I'll make a deal with you. If you ever want to buy me a ton of coal and haul it out from Denver, I'll take it in trade for the bunkhouse." It was fun moving the bunkhouse. We did it one Saturday. It was bigger than our whole house, and I couldn't see in the world if we could move it without tearing it all to pieces. But Fred and Father figured it out. Fred and his 2 hired men helped us, and it was easy as pie. Father shaped the ends of 4 double-length fence posts so they'd fit it into the hubs of the wagon wheels. Then he bored holes through the ends of them and put axle grease on the shaped part. As the men pried up one corner of the bunkhouse, I'd laid crib sticks under, the way Father showed me. We just kept going around and around it. They lifted a little and putting in another stick or 2 till it was high enough to run the shaped ends of the posts under it and into the hubs of the wheels. When the stay pins were driven, it made the whole bunkhouse into a great big 8-wheeled wagon. Of course, we couldn't turn any sharp corners, but we didn't need to. We just hitched on 4 horses and hauled it down across the prairie. At our house, we took it off the same way we had put it on. Father was fuzzy about making it land L-shaped to the back of our house, with the corners just touching. Although I was having a lot more fun at home, things were getting worse and worse at school. The Friday after we moved the bunkhouse, it got so bad I couldn't stand it any longer. We had just finished eating our lunches that noon when Freddie Sprague started picking on me. He yanked at my pants so hard that all but one of the buttons flew off, and I had to use both hands to hold them up. Then he got dirty and yelled to the other kids, Let's pull Molly's pants off so you won't have to squat like a girl." They did, and right where all the girls could see too. I didn't care whether Mother would be ashamed of me or not. I couldn't be a gentleman with my pants off, and I didn't want to be one anyway. I plowed into Freddie with both fists. I had a big advantage because he didn't expect it. His nose started bleeding before mine did, and that made me sure I could lick him. He tried to quit after a few minutes, but the older boys wouldn't let him out of the ring. I had been dreaming about that day for a month and kept hitting him as fast as I could make my arms go. I heard the girls' voices around the ring and looked right up into Grace's face. She was jumping up and down and yelling, hit him, hit him, hit him hard." I did my best, and Freddie put both arms up over my face, or his face. Once when the boys were pulling him back onto his feet, I glanced up toward the schoolhouse. Miss Wheeler was peeking out the corner of the window, but she didn't ring the bell till it was all over, and Grace had pinned my pants back on. Rudolph Haas lived way over south of the schoolhouse, but that night he drove Grace and me clear to our house in his buggy. Just before we got in, Miss Wheeler came and said for Grace to tell Mother that she thought I had made an adjustment now. Maybe she thought so, but Mother didn't. She started to cry as soon as she saw me. My eye had turned kind of greenish black. She even cried while she was paddling me. It was a good hard spanking with one of Father's slippers, but I didn't mind it at all. It was worth 2 spankings to lick Freddie. I don't remember all the things she said to me, but they were plenty. Then she told Grace to call Father. He sent me for the milk as soon as he came into the house. The next day was Saturday, and I worked with Father all day. He was cutting the bunkhouse in 2, so we could move one of the pieces around and build it into a new kitchen. Along in the middle of the forenoon, I was holding a window sash while he took off the frame. He had his back to me, and he hadn't been talking at all. All at once he said, "I hear you had a fight yesterday." I had been expecting it. I didn't look up, and he didn't turn around. I said, "Yes, sir." "Did you lick him?" "Yes, sir." "Good." That was all. He never mentioned it again. All right. Chapter 4, My Character House. While we were doing our lessons that night, Mother said, "Didn't Fred Altland offer to lend you horses until ours were well again?" It was a few minutes before Father answered. "Yes, ma'am, he did. But what is that one you quote about being neither a borrower nor a lender? Fred's a fine fellow, but I don't want to start borrowing from the neighbors, and then, too, he'll need all of his horses at plowing time when I'll have to have 3. Mother said, "I just don't see how we can take out $50 for another horse and more to buy harness for it until we have something to sell." Father didn't say anything except that he talked to Mr. Cash. Mr. Cash was an old horse trader peddler who used to come to our place every couple of weeks. He had an old covered wagon filled with everything from safety pins to rolls of second-hand barbed wire, and we usually had 3 or 4 old horses tied to the tailgate. He came by the next Saturday, and Father haggled with him for over an hour. It was out by the wagon when they finally made the deal. Father had looked the different horses over from teeth to hoofs. He had both hands in the hip pockets of his overalls, and he was looking at an old bay mare on the offside. "How much for Grandma?" he asked. Mr. Cash said he had paid $25 for her, but in the end he let Father have her for $17.50 and threw in a collar and hames with chain traces. When we were leading her to the barn, I noticed that she dragged one 4-foot hoof. Father said it was because she had been foundered, because she walked so slow. Mother named her Nancy Hanks, after a famous racehorse. Mother let me wear my overalls and blue shirt to school Monday morning. Grace fiddled along all the way, hunting for some certain kind of cactus. We got in just after the bell rang. Freddie's eye was blacker than mine, and his lips were stiff-puffed. I had wanted to get there early enough to see if I could lick him again before school began, but I had to wait for morning recess. Everybody from knew Freddie and I were going to fight again at recess time. We made faces at each other every time Miss Wheeler had her back to the class. What I didn't know was that Freddie had a deal with Johnny Alder to help him lick me. Johnny was in 5th grade and nearly as big as Willie Aldevote. As soon as we got out near the carriage shed, Freddie and Johnny both jumped on me. I was sure I was done for until Willie sailed in too. I always liked Willie Aldevote best of the boys. He was the second biggest in school, and he was 12, and he was the 6th grade in number work. He was the one who had the yellow spotted donkey. He could ride like everything. He had never been mean to me. Willie told Johnny, "If you're going to help Freddie, I'll help Molly." And the fight was on. It was really 2 fights for a while. Then, when Johnny was good and licked, Willie kept Freddie from holding me by the hair with one hand while he punched me with the other. Goodness. After that, I had better luck, and before the bell rang for the end of recess, Freddie had both arms over his face again. Then he did something that I ought to have loved for him. He said, "There ain't meat enough on him to hit. That's why I can't lick him. He's just a sack full of old spikes, and I hurt on my own hands worse than I hurt him every time I punch." At noon, I ate my lunch with all the rest of the fellows, sitting right between Willie Aldevote and Rudolph Haas. After we finished eating, Willie said, "Come on, Rudy, let's teach Spikes how to really ride that jackass. Nobody will ever write a poem that will sound as good to me as that did." I knew I wasn't going to be Molly anymore. I'd have tried to ride a rhinoceros if they'd said so. They got straps off one of the harnesses and a piece of good stout cord. After they'd buckled the straps real tight around the donkey, Rudy held him by the ears while Willie put me on and tied my feet together with the cord. He ran it snug between them under the donkey's belly. Willie told me not to be scared, to squeeze tight with my knees and watch the donkey's head so I could lean way back when he put it down to kick. I grabbed hold of the straps with both hands, and Rudy let him go. For what seemed like an hour, but it was probably 10 seconds, Things were happening too fast for me to keep up with them. I tried to watch his head and leaned back every time it went down, but it was bobbing so fast I lost the beat. My head snapped back and forth as though it were tied with rubber, and I bit my tongue. My head rang so I couldn't even hear Grace yelling. She had come running to pick up the pieces when I got killed, but I was still on top when he stopped and had fun. After school, Willie let me ride behind him on the donkey as far as our corner, and Grace was so proud of me that she promised not to tell Mother. 3 or 4 days after we got Nancy Hanks, Grace and I came home from school through our Westfield, so I could show her where Bill and Nig had fallen off the trestle. There were 12 or 13 long crosses in the bottom of the gulch, and I told Grace that Father had said for me to drag them home as soon as we got another horse. I had been riding Willie's donkey every day, and I thought I'd be able to handle any horse. I guess I'd made up too many stories before. Grace didn't believe me and told Mother about it the minute we got home. I should have admitted to Mother right then that it was only a story, but I was sure she'd spank me if I did. The more I thought about hauling those ties with Nancy, the more I wanted to do it. And since I was going to get a spanking anyway, I thought I might just as well have the fun of trying. She swore up and down that Father did tell me. He had gone to Denver after another load of bricks, and I was sure I could have a crossie home before he got back. Then he would probably be proud enough of me so that I wouldn't get spanked at all. Mother had to help me put the collar and hames on Nancy because they were heavy and the collar didn't have any buckle at the top. You had to put it over her head upside down and then turn it around. I never heard Father criticize Mother, and that was the only time I ever heard her criticize him. She put her hands on her hips and buttoned her mouth up tight. Then she said, "I don't know what in the world this ranch has done to your father," insisting that you wear overalls to school and be permitted to behave yourself like a gutter snipe. And now, sending a little 8-year-old boy off to haul logs with a new, untried horse. The crossies didn't haul as easy as I thought they would. I forgot to take anything along for hitching them to Nancy's singletree and had to use an old piece of barbed wire. I was walking on the downhill side of the crossie when we tried to go up over the bank at the head of the gulch. Suddenly, the tie started to roll toward me, and I had to dive out of the way. I skinned my nose, and barbed wire tore a big hole in my overalls. But the tie missed me, and Nancy seemed glad to stop and rest. I was still trying to haul it up over the bank when it got dark, and I was afraid Father would go get home before I did. It would be better to go right home and tell Mother I'd lied. If she spanked me first, he probably wouldn't get me another one right on top of it. Mother didn't spank me though. She gasped. I looked at me as if I'd been a rattlesnake ready to strike. Then she made me stand with my face in a corner. I stood there while the rest of the youngsters had their supper and went to bed, and for at least an hour afterward, my mother sat at the table and read the Bible. I knew that she was reading because I heard her take it down from the lamp shelf. There wasn't any clock in the kitchen, and the sound was the thumping of my own heart. At last I heard Father drive into the yard and listened to every sound as he put the team away and came to the house. He stood in the open doorway for a moment before he spoke. When he did, his voice was very quiet. What has happened, Mame? It was a full minute before Mother said anything, and then her voice was as quiet as Father's. Charles, the time has come when this boy must have a father's firm hand. I am appalled by the degeneracy he has shown since we left East Rochester. Here's the picture. I had never heard Mother's voice like that, and I had never heard her call Father Charles. I thought my heart would pound itself to pieces while she was telling him what I had done. Hard as Father could spank, he never hurt me so much with a stick as he did when Mother stopped talking. He cleared his throat, and then he didn't make a sound for at least 2 full minutes. When he spoke, his voice was deep and dry. I knew he must have been coughing a lot on the way home. Son, there is no question but what the thing you did, Son, there is no question but what the thing you have done today deserves severe punishment. You might have killed yourself or the horse, but much worse than that, you have injured your own character. A man's character is like his horse. If he tears boards off his house and burns them to keep himself warm and comfortable, his house soon becomes a ruin. If he tells lies to be able to do the things he shouldn't do but wants to, his character will soon become a ruin. A man will be ruined with a ruined character is a shame on the face of the earth. He waited until his words had plenty of time to soak in. Then he said, I might give you a hard thrashing. If I did, you would possibly remember the thrashing longer than you would remember about the injury you have done yourself. I am not going to do it. There were 18 crossies in the gulch yesterday. In the section, foremen told me there were going to replace 20 more. Until you have dragged every one of those ties home, you will wear your Buster Brown suit to school, and I will not take you anywhere with me. It was half a mile from the house to the gulch. Father showed me how to hook onto the ties with a chain and how to pull them up through the head of the gulch. By getting up early, I dragged 1 tie home each morning and 2 after school, with a half a dozen on Saturdays. I had the job done in a couple weeks. It was a tough 2 weeks. I was sure I would become Molly again for wearing the Buster Brown suit to school. I think Grace saved that by telling everybody what a bad boy I was. Then, too, the weather turned windy and cold. The gulch half filled with dry tumbleweeds that scratched me when I dug through them to get the ties. But worst of all, Mother got a song in her head. When that happened, she would sing the same tune over and over and over for a week at a time. That time it was, "The bird was a broken pinion." I don't think she was singing it for me, but I couldn't go into the house without hearing about a young life broken by sin's seductive art, or that the soul that sin hath stricken never soars so high again. It made me think a lot. As I walked along behind Nancy in a dragon crossie, about the permanent damage I had already done to my character.